The young and the restless spoilers for years, Traci had lived her life in quiet corridors and dignified silence, the kind that only those who had known heartbreak could cultivate with such elegance. Genoa City had always known her as the steady abbot, the calming force in a family fraught with turmoil, the one who never sought the spotlight, who wrote about other people's chaos instead of creating her own. But beneath her composed exterior was a truth long buried. One that pulsed beneath her skin like a dormant secret aching for oxygen. Years ago, during a period when Lily Winters was serving time behind bars and Kane Ashby had been left untethered by loss, Traci had found herself drawn to him. What began as mutual comfort, two lonely souls colliding in a season of vulnerability, slowly, inevitably, transformed into something passionate. It was a love that shouldn't have existed, one born in the shadows, obscured by guilt and the looming presence of a woman neither of them could truly forget. Yet in that brief window of stolen time, Traci had allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in decades, youthful, reckless, deeply and desperately wanted. But when Lily was released and returned to reclaim her life, the flame between Traci and Kane was quietly extinguished. There were no accusations, no confrontations, just a mutual understanding that what they had was transient, unspoken, and ultimately impossible. Traci retreated into her world of literature and family obligations, and Kane disappeared once more into the ever-spinning wheel of Newman Chancellor drama. But the affair had left something behind. Traci had known almost immediately. And yet, true to her nature, she told no one. Not Jack. Not Ashley. Not even Kane. She had taken her swollen grief and fled Genoa City under the guise of a sabbatical, seeking refuge in Europe, first Milan, then Venice, and finally Paris, where she stayed. And it was in that city of hidden alleyways and quiet cafes that she gave birth to a boy with black hair and a solemn intensity that mirrored Kane's even as an infant. She named him Daniel. Not after anyone in particular? Just a name that sounded strong, timeless, and poetic enough to echo in her heart without revealing the fire that had forged him. For years, Traci raised him alone. She published books. She visited Genoa City only for funerals or holidays. When people asked about her life abroad, she smiled and spoke vaguely of inspiration and solitude. No one ever asked for more. They never imagined she could carry a secret this immense in that gentle, patient heart of hers. But secrets have a half-life. And Traci had grown tired of pretending her son didn't exist. It began with a rumor. Traci heard that Kane was returning. At first she dismissed it, just another corporate maneuver or family obligation pulling him back into the gravitational force of Genoa City. But then she read that he would be in Paris for a series of international meetings. And something shifted. Perhaps it was time. Perhaps it was destiny. Perhaps it was guilt. Or maybe it was the look on Daniel's face one morning when he asked why his father wasn't in any of his school pictures. Whatever the reason, Traci packed their bags. She booked a quiet hotel near Montmartre and told Daniel they were going to meet someone important. The day was overcast when it happened. Kane had agreed to meet Traci in a park near the Seine, unaware that his world was about to be split in two. He arrived in a sharp navy coat, his hair grayer than she remembered, his eyes still holding that same glint of confusion and curiosity he'd worn the day she kissed him goodbye. Traci was already sitting on a bench, Daniel beside her, sketching in a notebook. When Kane approached, he smiled, cordial, uncertain, polite. Then he saw the boy. He stared. Not because Daniel was familiar, but because something ancient stirred in his chest, something primal. He didn't speak for several seconds, and Traci didn't either. Finally, she said it plainly. His name is Daniel. He's your son. Kane blinked, as if the words were in a language he hadn't heard in years. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face. And then the storm broke across his expression, not rage, not joy, but devastation. Not because he doubted her, but because he instantly believed her. There was no need for DNA tests or long explanations. One look at Daniel, his eyes, the sharp jawline, the way his hands moved when he was nervous, and Kane knew. It was him. It had always been him. Why didn't you tell me?" he managed, the words hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I was afraid," Traci admitted, her voice trembling but resolute. "Afraid it would ruin your life. Afraid it would ruin mine. And mostly, I was afraid you'd ask me to get rid of him." Kane took a step back, as if physically injured by the accusation. "I would never, I know that now," she interrupted, before he could spiral further. "But back then, I didn't know anything. I only knew you were about to go back to Lily, and I didn't want to be the reason you didn't." Daniel looked up at them both, eyes wide, sensing the gravity of the moment even if he didn't fully understand it. Kane knelt in front of him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been here." Traci's heart broke and rebuilt itself in the same breath. She had carried this alone for so long that the act of finally speaking it out loud felt both liberating and terrifying. But she hadn't anticipated what came next. Kane stood up, and for the first time in years, he looked at her like a man unmoored, like someone facing a tidal wave with nothing to cling to. "I need time," he said. "But I want to know him. I want to be part of his life." And that, Traci thought, was more than she had hoped for. But fate is rarely content with simple reconciliations. The news spread fast. Jack was stunned. Ashley was furious she'd been kept in the dark. Billy, of all people, tried to joke about it until he realized how serious it was. Jill, when she found out, was less surprised than anyone. Of course Kane would charm another Abbott, she'd muttered before slamming the phone down. But the real fallout came from Lily. She was no longer with Kane, but the revelation of a child conceived during her incarceration reignited old wounds. She accused Traci of betrayal, of cowardice, of exploiting Kane's grief. Traci, to her credit, didn't retaliate. She accepted the blows, knowing they were rooted in pain. Meanwhile, Kane tried to step into fatherhood with a quiet intensity that surprised everyone. He took Daniel to museums. They shared awkward lunches where conversation was stilted and strained. But slowly, something began to form. A bond. A tentative trust. Daniel didn't open up easily. He was, after all, Traci's son, but Kane was patient. And Traci, watching them from a distance, realized that perhaps her greatest story was one she hadn't yet written. But life in Paris wasn't a fairy tale. Rumors began to swirl. Reporters caught wind of the Abbott family love child. Newman Enterprises began asking questions. Was Kane fit to lead an international division while managing a scandal of this magnitude? Victor Newman himself made a cryptic remark at a shareholders' meeting. Some men build legacies, others just leave footprints in foreign soil. And yet, Traci remained calm. She had weathered worse storms. And this time, she wasn't alone. Her son had a father. Kane had a purpose. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was still something between them worth saving. In the final days of their Parisian stay, Traci took Kane aside. "I don't expect anything from you," she said. "But I need you to know, I never stopped caring about you. And I never regretted that time we had. Not for 1 second." Kane didn't answer right away. He simply took her hand, kissed it gently, and looked out at the city that had held their secret for so long. "We'll figure it out," he said. "All of it." And for once, Traci believed him. "Let me know if you'd like to continue this storyline. I can take it even further." Reactions back in Genoa City, Daniel visiting the Abbott mansion, or even a legal fight if someone tries to contest Kane's parental rights. Kane never imagined that his life could pivot so violently in the space of a single breath, yet there he stood, eyes fixated on the boy who bore his face, heart pounding with the enormity of what had just been revealed. It was as though every carefully constructed compartment within his soul, the regrets, the choices, the losses, and the buried past, had suddenly collapsed into one another, crumbling under the weight of a single undeniable truth: he had a son. He had a son he never knew, a son who had grown up without his presence, without his protection, without his name. And yet, as he stared into the quiet, inquisitive eyes of that child, Cain felt something shift, something anchor itself deep within him. A sense of unshakable responsibility and an overwhelming ache that could only come from missing out on something irreplaceable. He turned toward Traci, this woman who had once known him more intimately than most, who had loved him during a season of grief and chaos, who had offered him her warmth when his world had felt cold and hollow. He whispered a sincere apology, not for discovering the truth too late, but for all the pain his ignorance had caused, for the loneliness she must have endured bringing a child into the world without his hand to hold, for the stolen years he could never return. Yet as the words slipped from his lips, he could sense that Traci did not expect redemption from him, nor forgiveness, because she had already made peace with her choices long before he arrived in that Parisian park. She was not angry. She was not bitter. She simply looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had carried a secret with grace, who had loved deeply and let go even deeper, who had never once allowed the silence of her sacrifice to turn into resentment. Traci told him she was grateful, not regretful. That he had once given her the gift of motherhood, that despite everything, raising Daniel had been the greatest joy of her life, that those years spent reading stories to him, watching him draw, feeling his small arms wrapped around her waist had filled her with more purpose than any romance ever could. She didn't need anything more from Cain, she said, because her heart had already been full. And Cain, for all his confusion and remorse, believed her. He looked at her and saw not a woman scorned but a mother fulfilled. Yet still, he knew that gratitude was not enough, nor were apologies sufficient. There was a debt that could not be measured in words, only in actions. Cain promised her that he would be there, not as a shadow, not as a visitor, but as a father in every sense of the word. He would support Daniel, guide him, protect him, show up when it mattered and be silent when it didn't. He would love the boy in his own way, not out of guilt, but out of a recognition that blood ties carried sacred weight. But love for Traci? That part of his heart had long since closed. His affections had always leaned back toward Lily, even with the distance, even with their many fractures. Traci, for all her grace and goodness, represented a moment, important, cherished, but confined to a specific time. And Cain, though softened by fatherhood, could not bring himself to reignite something he no longer felt. He saw Traci as dignified and kind, but not as the woman who could share the rest of his life. She was older, steadier, maternal in a way that made him feel more grateful than drawn. He knew the truth would hurt, but he could not pretend. He told her quietly that while he would honor her as the mother of his child, he could not be her partner. That part of their story was over. Traci, unsurprised, only nodded. She had known it all along. She had not come to Paris to reclaim a love lost, she had come to set a truth free, to give her son what he deserved, and to close a chapter with dignity. In the stillness that followed, there was no bitterness, only a mutual understanding that sometimes love is not meant to be rekindled, only remembered. Cain stepped forward, brushing his hand against his son's shoulder, making a silent vow to be the father he hadn't been allowed to be. And Traci, with her heart intact, turned away from them both, not because she was walking away from pain, but because she had already walked through it and survived. Her story with Cain was never meant to end in a fairy tale. It was meant to leave her with a legacy, a son she adored, a chapter she wrote in the margins of life with no expectation of applause. And in the city of light, as the river flowed beside them and time moved forward, Traci Abbott finally let go of the past, not with sadness, but with serenity, because in the end, she had already won. She had raised a good boy. She had lived a quiet miracle. And now, she would begin again, not as the woman who loved Cain, but as the woman who had given birth to a future he could no longer ignore. Let me know if you'd like to continue this story. Such as Daniel's adjustment to meeting Cain, tension with Lily, or how the Abbotts react. I can expand even further.